The first slap wasn't the worst. It was the second, the one that came when I was already bracing for it, the one that shattered whatever part of me still believed I could stop this. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood there, my face burning, my heartbeat rattling inside my ribs like something caged. The restaurant had gone silent. The clatter of silverware, the low hum of conversation, all of it gone, swallowed by the weight of what had just happened. His voice was calm, measured. "You're being dramatic." I could feel everyone watching. Strangers frozen mid-bite, their eyes flickering between us, unsure whether to intervene or pretend they hadn't seen anything at all. The waitress stood a few feet away, gripping her tray so tightly her knuckles had turned white. "Ma'am, do you need?" "I'm fine," I cut in, my voice eerily steady. A lie. But what else was I supposed to say? That my fiancé, the man I had spent the last 5 years building a life with, had just humiliated me in front of a room full of people? That this wasn't the first time? That I had spent months convincing myself that it would never happen again, only to end up right back here, swallowing my pride along with the metallic taste of my own shame? I turned back to him, my hands trembling under the table. "We're leaving." For a moment, I thought he might argue, might smirk that infuriating smirk and tell me to sit back down like I was a child throwing a tantrum. But something in my expression must have warned him, because he just stood, tossing a few bills onto the table before grabbing my wrist and pulling me toward the exit. The moment we stepped outside, the night air wrapped around me like a vice, cold and suffocating. He sighed, rubbing a hand over his face like I was the problem, like my reaction was the real offense. "You're always making things worse than they are. If you would just..." I wrenched my arm free. And then, for the first time in my life, I did something I had never done before. I walked away. Not in anger. Not as part of some dramatic fight. Just walked. Past the restaurant. Past the streetlights. Past the life I had spent 5 years convincing myself was enough. I kept walking until the city noise dulled into a quiet hum, until my legs ached and my hands stopped shaking. When I finally stopped, I was standing in front of my apartment building, staring at the life I had built brick by fragile brick, knowing it was all about to come crumbling down. I walked inside, grabbed a suitcase, and started packing. Not just for the night. Not just to make a point. This time, I was leaving for good. The apartment was silent, but I could still hear his voice in my head. Sharp, dismissive, laced with the same quiet threat I had ignored for too long. I forced my hands to keep moving, shoving clothes into the suitcase without folding them, grabbing whatever I could carry. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have anywhere to go. All I knew was that if I stayed, this would never end. The sound of my phone vibrating on the counter made my stomach twist. I didn't have to look to know who it was. The calls had started the second I walked out of that restaurant, each one a reminder that he still expected me to come back. That I was still his to control. My fingers hovered over the screen for a moment before I sent the call to voicemail and turned the phone off completely. I pulled open a drawer, grabbed my passport, my bank cards, whatever cash I had left. My mind was running through options, trying to piece together an escape that wouldn't end with me crawling back. I had money, not much, but enough to disappear for a while. I had a car sitting in the parking garage downstairs, gas tank full. I had no excuses. A knock at the door shattered the silence. It was soft at first, almost hesitant. Then harder, more insistent. I froze, my heartbeat slamming against my ribs. His voice came through the door, low and controlled. "Open the door." I didn't move. Seconds stretched into an eternity. Another knock. Harder. "I know you're in there." The handle rattled. I took a step back, my mind racing through every possibility. He didn't have a key. He shouldn't have a key. But I had seen the way he charmed people, how easily he could manipulate strangers into giving him what he wanted. My building manager liked him. The security guard downstairs thought he was polite. It would take nothing for him to convince someone to let him in. I grabbed my suitcase and bolted for the back door. The fire escape was cold under my bare feet as I climbed down, gripping the railing with shaking hands. The second I hit the ground, I ran. I didn't stop to check if he had heard me, didn't look back to see if he was following. I just ran, heart pounding, lungs burning, every nerve in my body screaming at me to keep moving. I reached my car and yanked the door open, throwing the suitcase into the passenger seat. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life, headlights cutting through the darkness. My pulse pounded in my ears as I threw the car into reverse, tires screeching against the pavement. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to go. The highway stretched ahead of me, dark and empty, the city shrinking in my rearview mirror with every mile. My hands were still gripping the steering wheel too tightly, my knuckles aching from the pressure, but I couldn't force myself to loosen them. I kept expecting to see his headlights in my mirror, expecting my phone to light up with another call, another message, another reminder that he wasn't done with me. But my phone was still off, buried under my jacket on the passenger seat, and the only lights on the road were the distant glow of a gas station sign up ahead. I hadn't eaten all day. Hadn't stopped moving long enough to feel the hunger clawing at my stomach, but now, with nothing but open road ahead, my body was catching up to me. My head was pounding. My chest felt tight. The adrenaline that had been keeping me going was burning out, leaving behind exhaustion so deep it felt like my bones might give out under the weight of it. I needed to stop. Just for a minute. I pulled into the gas station lot, parking near the entrance where the lights were brightest. The place was nearly empty, just an old pickup truck at the far end and a single attendant behind the counter, staring at a flickering TV mounted on the wall. The air outside was sharp, carrying the scent of gasoline and damp pavement as I stepped out of the car, my legs unsteady beneath me. I kept my head down as I walked inside, moving straight to the back where the refrigerators hummed softly, rows of bottled water and soda lined up in perfect rows. I reached for a drink, my fingers brushing against the cold plastic, and then I heard it. The sound of a phone buzzing. Not mine. It was coming from the next aisle over, where a man stood with his back to me, his head tilted down as he checked the screen. I couldn't see his face, just the sharp lines of his shoulders under a dark jacket, the way his fingers moved over the screen too quickly, like he was sending a message he didn't want anyone to see. My stomach twisted. I told myself I was being paranoid, that it was just some stranger checking his phone, that I wasn't being followed, that I hadn't left too late, that he couldn't have found me this fast. And then I heard my name. A whisper, barely audible, but I knew it wasn't my imagination. I turned sharply, my breath caught in my throat, but the man was already walking toward the exit, his phone still pressed to his ear, his pace too casual to be natural. I watched as he pushed through the door, stepping into the night without so much as a glance in my direction. I forced myself to breathe, forced my hands to unclench, forced my heart to slow even as my instincts screamed at me to run. I took my drink and a pack of granola bars to the counter, fumbling for cash instead of my card, not wanting to leave a digital trail. The attendant barely looked up as he rang me up, his fingers tapping lazily against the counter as he yawned. Late night drive? Yeah, I said, voice flat, forcing myself to sound normal, forcing my expression into something unreadable. Something like that. He nodded, handing me my change without another word. I grabbed my bag and stepped outside, scanning the parking lot without turning my head too obviously. The pickup truck was still there. My car was still there. The man was gone. But the unease in my gut didn't disappear. I got back in the car and locked the doors, my pulse hammering in my ears as I restarted the engine. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe it was just a coincidence. But I didn't check my phone. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't do anything except press my foot against the gas and get back onto the road. I had planned to drive until morning, to put as much distance between myself and my old life as possible before stopping, but now every shadow on the road felt too sharp, every set of headlights in my mirror too familiar. I told myself I wasn't being followed, that I was just tired, that my mind was playing tricks on me, but I kept checking the mirror anyway. And when I finally pulled off the road hours later, parking outside a rundown motel on the edge of nowhere, I sat in the driver's seat for a long time, staring at the dark stretch of highway behind me, waiting for something I couldn't name. Nothing happened. But the feeling didn't leave. The motel smelled like damp carpet and old cigarettes, the air thick with something stale, something that had been trapped between these walls for years. I paid in cash, gave a fake name, and avoided the motel clerk's gaze as he slid the key across the counter. He barely looked at me, barely acknowledged my existence beyond the transaction, and for once, I was grateful. I didn't want to be noticed. I didn't want to be remembered. The room was small, just a bed, a nightstand, a TV that probably hadn't worked in years, but it didn't matter. It had a lock. It had curtains thick enough to block out the world. That was enough. I bolted the door behind me, checked the window twice, then dropped my bag onto the bed and sat down, my legs finally giving out under the weight of the night. I turned on my phone. The messages flooded in immediately, one after another, filling the screen with missed calls, voicemails, texts that I didn't have the strength to read. I scrolled through them, my pulse spiking when I saw his name. "Where are you? Come back. You're making a mistake." The last message sent a chill through my spine. "I saw you." My breath caught in my throat, my fingers tightening around the phone. My mind raced back to the gas station, to the man with the phone, to the way he had whispered my name before disappearing into the night. It had to be him. It had to be. I looked at the timestamp. 20 minutes ago. I stood up so fast the bed creaked beneath me. My hands shook as I grabbed the curtains, peeling them back just enough to see outside. The parking lot was mostly empty, just my car and a few others scattered across the cracked pavement. No sign of him. No sign of anything unusual. But that didn't mean he wasn't there. I grabbed my suitcase and dragged it toward the door, my body moving before my mind could catch up. I couldn't stay here. I had been stupid to stop, stupid to think I could slow down, stupid to believe I was ahead of him. He was always one step behind. Always watching. Always waiting. The sound of a car engine made my heart slam against my ribs. Headlights cut through the night, sweeping across the parking lot, illuminating the room's thin curtains for a brief second before vanishing again. I pressed myself against the wall, barely breathing, my ears straining for any sound, any sign of movement outside the door. Nothing. I waited. 5 minutes. 10. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. I reached for my bag, gripping the handle tightly as I made my decision. I wasn't waiting for him to find me. I was leaving now. I checked the peephole, saw nothing, then unbolted the door as quietly as I could, stepping out into the cold night. The wind hit my face, sharp and unforgiving, but I didn't stop. I made it to my car, yanked the door open, threw the suitcase onto the passenger seat, and got in, locking the doors behind me. My fingers trembled as I pushed the key into the ignition, turning it with a sharp twist. The engine sputtered, then died. A cold wave of panic crashed over me. I turned the key again, harder this time. Nothing. The dashboard stayed dark, the engine silent. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it, trying to push past the rising panic. This wasn't random. This wasn't bad luck. Someone had done this. My breathing turned shallow, my fingers gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. I turned my head, scanning the parking lot again, every shadow suddenly too deep, every dark corner hiding something I couldn't see. A figure moved near the edge of the lot. Slow, unhurried, like they had all the time in the world. The motel clerk. I hadn't paid attention to him before, hadn't thought twice about the way he had barely looked at me when I checked in. But now, standing under the flickering neon sign, his phone in his hand, his gaze locked onto my car, something in my gut twisted. I wasn't supposed to leave. I wasn't supposed to escape. And I wasn't alone. The motel clerk didn't move. He stood under the dim glow of the neon sign, phone in hand, his face unreadable. I couldn't tell if he was waiting for something or someone, but every nerve in my body screamed at me to get out. My car wasn't an option anymore. Someone had made sure of that. I forced myself to think, to push past the panic clawing at my throat. There had to be another way. I grabbed my bag, keeping my movements slow, careful. If he was watching, I didn't want him to know I had figured it out. I eased the car door open just enough to slip out, crouching low as I pressed my back against the frame. The lot was mostly empty, but there were other cars, other places to hide. I just had to reach them without being seen. The wind carried the faint sound of his voice. He was talking to someone. I moved. Keeping low, I darted behind the nearest car, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. I peeked around the side, my pulse spiking when I saw him shift, glancing in my direction before turning his attention back to his phone. I couldn't stay here. If he checked the lot, if he walked toward my car, he would see the door hanging open. He would know. I scanned the area. The motel office was too risky. The road was too exposed. Then I saw it, the maintenance door near the back of the building, slightly ajar. It was my only chance. I moved fast. Each step felt too loud, my breathing too sharp, but I didn't stop. I reached the door, slipped inside, and pressed my back against the wall, willing my body to disappear into the shadows. The air inside was thick with the scent of old wood and cleaning supplies. A single dim light flickered overhead, casting long, uneven shadows across the floor. I listened. Footsteps. Slow, unhurried. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay still. He was looking. Searching. The sound of his boots scraping against the pavement made my skin prickle. Then the noise stopped. Silence stretched, thick and suffocating. My grip tightened around the strap of my bag. If he opened the door, if he stepped inside. The phone rang. A sharp, piercing sound that made my breath catch. He answered on the second ring. Yeah, she's here. My stomach dropped. I didn't wait to hear the rest. I turned, moving deeper into the narrow hallway, my mind racing. Someone had sent him. Someone knew exactly where I was. The gas station. The motel. The broken car. It wasn't random. It had never been random. I reached a back door and shoved it open, stepping into the cold night air. My body was running on instinct now, my thoughts a chaotic mess of panic and desperation. I had to get out of here. I had to disappear before it was too late. The road stretched ahead, dark and empty. No cars. No people. Just miles of nothing. My only option was to keep moving, to put as much distance between myself and that motel as possible. My feet hit the pavement hard, each step sending a sharp jolt up my legs, but I didn't slow down. A car engine roared to life behind me. My breath hitched. I didn't turn around. Didn't check to see how close they were. I just ran. Faster. Harder. My lungs burned, my legs screamed, but I pushed forward, the sound of tires crunching against gravel growing louder with each passing second. Then, suddenly, lights flooded the road ahead. Blinding. Bright. A second car. My steps faltered, panic crashing over me in waves. I was trapped. I had nowhere to go. Nowhere to hide. The car in front of me slowed, the driver's side door swinging open. A figure stepped out. Not him. Not the motel clerk. Someone else. And they were waiting for me. The figure stepped forward, slow and deliberate, the glow from the headlights casting sharp shadows across their face. My mind was screaming at me to move, to run, to do anything but stand frozen in the middle of an empty road like a trapped animal, but my legs wouldn't obey. My breath came in short, uneven bursts, my pulse hammering against my skin. Every instinct told me that this wasn't a coincidence, that this person had been waiting for me, that the motel clerk's phone call hadn't been a warning, it had been a signal. Then they spoke. You shouldn't be here. The voice was low, firm, unfamiliar. A second later, the car behind me lurched forward, its tires crunching against the pavement as it rolled closer, boxing me in. I forced myself to swallow the panic rising in my throat, my mind racing through every possible escape route. The fields on either side of the road stretched out into open darkness, nowhere to hide. Running was pointless. Fighting? I had no weapon, no strength left in my limbs. I took a step back, trying to gauge the distance between me and the second car. If I could reach it before the driver got out. Don't. The figure's voice cut through the night, sharp and unyielding. Just listen. Listen? To who? To someone who had been waiting for me in the middle of nowhere? To someone who clearly wasn't here by accident? Every fiber of my being screamed that this was wrong, that I was being cornered, that I had walked straight into a trap. My body tensed as the driver's door of the second car swung open, another person stepping out. I barely had time to register the movement before the first figure lifted a hand, signaling for them to stop. No one's going to hurt you. I didn't believe them. My hands curled into fists at my sides, my nails digging into my palms. Who sent you? A pause. Then, you know who. The confirmation sent a cold wave of dread through me. I had spent years trying to convince myself that the man I had left behind wasn't dangerous, that he was manipulative and cruel, but not the kind of person who would send people after me in the middle of the night. But this was different. This was careful. Organized. You need to come with us. I let out a sharp laugh, the sound bitter and thin. That's not happening. The second figure took a step forward, their silhouette sharper now, their presence heavier. I tensed, ready to run, ready to fight, ready for anything except what happened next. Then you need to see this. They pulled something from their pocket and tossed it onto the ground between us. It landed with a soft thud, the dim glow from the headlights catching the corner of a photograph. My stomach twisted as I took a slow step forward, my eyes locking onto the image. And then my entire world tilted. It was a picture of me. Not from tonight. Not from the gas station or the motel, or even from the city I had left behind. This was older months, maybe even a year. A candid shot of me sitting in a cafe, unaware, my expression distant. Someone had been watching me long before tonight. Long before I had even considered leaving. The first figure's voice cut through the fog in my mind. You think you ran away, but you never left. I couldn't breathe. This wasn't just about tonight. This had been happening for a long, long time. And I had never even noticed. I picked up the photograph with numb fingers, my mind struggling to piece together the truth that had been hiding in plain sight. The grainy image showed me sitting by a cafe window, stirring a coffee I didn't remember drinking, wearing a sweater I hadn't seen in months. The timestamp in the corner sent a slow wave of nausea through me. This wasn't new. It wasn't from the last few days, or even the last few weeks. Someone had been following me long before I had ever thought about leaving. I looked up, my pulse pounding against my skin, my voice barely steady. Who took this? The first figure didn't answer right away. He was watching me closely, as if trying to measure how much I could handle before he decided what to say next. Finally, he exhaled, tilting his head slightly. It's not a question of who. It's a question of how long. My grip on the photograph tightened. What does that mean? It means, he said slowly, deliberately, that you were never just some woman who left a bad relationship. You were always part of something bigger. I shook my head, my breath coming faster now. That's bullshit. Is it? He gestured to the second figure, who reached into their jacket and pulled out something else, another photo. This time, they didn't throw it to the ground. They held it up for me to see. And my blood ran cold. It was another picture of me. But this one was different. In the image, I wasn't alone. I was standing next to him. My ex. We were in a parking lot. He had one hand gripping my wrist, his face twisted into something unreadable, my expression caught somewhere between fear and exhaustion. I had no memory of this moment, but the timestamp told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't from years ago. It was from 3 days before I left. I took a step back, my breath catching in my throat. No, that's not possible. You don't remember, do you? The first figure's voice was calm, almost patient. That's the problem. You don't remember a lot of things. I turned my head sharply, glaring at him. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but I remember everything I need to. I remember what he did to me. I remember why I left. And I remember that I want nothing to do with any of this. Then why, he said, taking a slow step forward, does he still know exactly where you are? The weight of his words crushed the air from my lungs. I had cut ties. I had left my job, abandoned my apartment, paid in cash, avoided cameras, shut off my phone. There was no reason he should have been able to track me this far. No reason he should have been able to send people after me. No reason this photograph should exist. Unless I had never really escaped at all. The second figure finally spoke, their voice lower, rougher. Think, really think. Was there ever a moment where it felt off? I wanted to tell them no. I wanted to stand my ground and insist that I knew my own life. But then my mind started piecing things together, pulling at loose threads I hadn't realized were unraveling until now. The way my apartment door had been unlocked when I swore I had locked it. The missing emails from my inbox. The strange calls I had dismissed as spam. The feeling, late at night, that someone was standing just outside my window, watching. I had ignored them all. And now I was standing on an empty road in the middle of nowhere, facing two people who knew more about my life than I did. My voice came out hollow. "What do you want from me?" The first figure didn't hesitate. "We want to keep you alive." A car door slammed behind me. I spun around just in time to see another set of headlights flash on, the bright beams cutting through the darkness. The sound of tires skidding against pavement sent a bolt of panic through me. I wasn't supposed to be here. And now, neither were they. The moment the second car's headlights flooded the road, the two figures in front of me moved. Fast. The first man grabbed my wrist, his grip tight but not painful, yanking me sideways just as the vehicle's engine roared. The tires screeched against the pavement as it surged forward. I barely had time to react before I was being pulled behind one of the parked cars, my breath slamming against my ribs as the world around me erupted into chaos. The second figure, silent until now, pulled something from their jacket, and my stomach twisted when I saw the unmistakable shape of a gun. They turned sharply, aiming toward the approaching car, but before they could fire, the vehicle skidded to a stop, its tires kicking up dust and gravel. The doors flew open. Two men stepped out. I knew one of them. The breath left my lungs. It wasn't my ex, but it was someone who worked for him. Someone I had seen in the background at dinner parties, standing by his office door, exchanging quiet words in hallways when they thought I wasn't listening. I had never known his name. I had never thought I needed to. But now he was here, standing under the glare of the headlights, his face impassive as his gaze locked onto mine. "You shouldn't have run," he said, voice smooth, almost bored. The first man beside me, the one who had dragged me to safety, muttered a curse under his breath. "You need to get in the car," he said, low and urgent. I was still trying to catch up, still trying to process how the hell this had escalated so fast, but my body moved before my brain could catch up. I turned, but the second man, my ex's associate, spoke again, his tone sharper this time. "Don't." The gun in the second figure's hands lifted slightly. "You might want to rethink that." The man in the headlights smiled. "We're not here to hurt her. Just to bring her home." Home. The word sent a wave of nausea through me. I forced my voice to stay steady. "I don't have a home." "That's not true," he said, taking a step forward. "You had everything. And you threw it away." Something inside me snapped. "Everything?" I spat. "You mean a cage? A life where I couldn't breathe without asking for permission? Where I had to pretend, every single day, that I was happy just to survive? That's not a life. That's not home." His expression didn't change. He didn't even blink. And that terrified me more than anything else. The first man beside me, still gripping my wrist, still keeping me close, muttered something under his breath before shoving me toward the car behind us. "Get in. Now." I didn't argue. The moment my hand touched the car door, the other man moved. Not toward me, toward the second figure. Gunfire shattered the night. I flinched, my pulse spiking as I threw myself into the car, my breath coming too fast, too uneven. The driver's door slammed shut, the engine roared to life, and before I could even register what was happening, we were peeling out of the lot, the other car vanishing into the distance behind us. I turned sharply, my fingers gripping the seat. "Who the hell are you?" The first man, the one who had pulled me from the road, kept his eyes on the windshield, his jaw tight. "Someone who knows what he's capable of." I swallowed hard. "And what exactly is that?" The second figure, the one who had fired the gun, finally spoke again. "You don't want to know." But I did. I needed to. Because for the first time since I had left, I realized I hadn't been running from a man. I had been running from something much, much worse. The moment you stop running and start fighting for yourself is the moment you take your life back. Fear keeps you trapped, but the truth, no matter how painful, is the only thing that will set you free.